Hello and welcome to the Autosport Q&A episode where we put your questions to our esteemed panel and find out what they think. If you want to get your questions in, you can do on Instagram, on YouTube as well, and keep your eyes open for our call out on autosport.com. Now, joining me, the esteemed panel is a bit of a double-barrel dream fest, if that is such a thing. I'm delighted to have Mark Mann-Bryans, hello to you, and Jake Boxall-Legg, aka JBL. I've done it the right way around this time for you, JBL. How are you both?
Good, thank you.
Good.
Very feeling like we're amongst friends with double barrels.
Yeah, where's your double barrel, Bryn?
I left it at home intentionally. Thank you very much for pointing out my failings in life, but there you go. I shall do better next time. It's been a week since we last did this, JBL. Many more questions have come in post Qatar. An interesting Grand Prix, a very lively Grand Prix, and quite a lot of the questions kind of relate to that. So let's kick things off straight away, shall we? First question, this is from First Name, Last Name, Like It. And they say, what would have been the best way to deal with Albon's fallen mirror during the race? Do you want to kick it off, Mark?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of opinion around, but I think the one opinion is that something different should have been done to the way it was treated, the way it was handled. I think whether the race director, the stewards maybe were worried that we'd already had a couple of safety cars and they didn't want to just throw another safety car. But you just look at the still of where that mirror is on one of the fastest parts of the circuit, and it almost beggars belief that they didn't just think we need to get this off as quickly as possible, because the inevitable happened. It was always going to happen. It was probably Valtteri Bottas's luck this season. He's going to have another 7 years of bad luck after that. But it was almost inevitable that was going to happen, and it looks bad after the changes we've seen recently that there was such an indecision.
JBL, you enjoyed that broken mirror analogy there, didn't you?
Oh yeah.
7 years. But it was strange, wasn't it? Because lap after lap, they were saying that maybe the marshals were looking for a gap that was big enough for them to jump out across the wall, get the mirror, retrieve it, and jump back. I mean, this is ridiculous. 2024 Formula One. When are they going to start getting their head around safety? Because that could have been a massive, massive incident, couldn't it?
Well, I think part of the thing that complicates it is that afterwards the FIA produced this explanation of why they did what they did. And the whole sort of rationale, I guess, was them saying if debris is off the racing line, then we're inclined to leave it. And that doesn't really wash, because technically, yes, it is off the racing line, but it is the primary overtaking point where there will be cars, 2-3 abreast going down the start-finish straight, and so someone's going to run it over. It's like Valtteri Bottas did us all a favour. He goes, I'll run this over and rather prove the point. Actually, he didn't see it at all, but I think that sort of underlines why they should have looked at it. And I think safety car, probably not off the... I would have said, VSC, they've got all of the GPS data to show where the cars are on track. So theoretically, you throw out the VSC. If there's not really a window to do it, then you go for the full safety car, move everybody into one train, and then you've got a nice clear track to sort it out. But it's a bizarre situation. And although it's easy to say in hindsight what should have been done, I think common sense should have prevailed in that situation.
In a DRS zone as well, on a start-finish straight, lap after lap, how come the drivers didn't know exactly what was on track and exactly where it was? Because there are enough laps for the team to tell Bottas, for example, by the way, on pit exit, just before you get to pit exit, there's a mirror on the right-hand side, stay left. They could have, the teams could have done that. There's no reason in my mind why a driver would not know there was something on track that could have caused themselves some significant damage.
Yeah, it kind of plays into the whole calamity of errors, really, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned there, are we waiting for these stewards to, play Frogger and run on and try and grab the mirror? And it was such a strange scenario from top to bottom, really. Even how it happened in the first place, even that mirror just coming off in the way it did. So, yeah, from start to finish, and then we had a couple of punctures. Obviously, we believe the science one might not have been to do with that. Hamilton certainly was. So, he had an awful weekend. That just topped it off for him. But the safety element has to be ahead of the racing element in every decision that they take, and I don't know if that was particularly on Sunday.
But a new race director, because of the situation, this ongoing situation with the boss man, it seems to be, is that partly to blame, that we've got a new race director in position and maybe he doesn't want to do something wrong, he needs to try to keep it as smooth as possible?
I think there's a little bit of it is a big call to make. But as a race director, you can't be afraid of making those calls. That's the bottom line here. We say he's inexperienced, but actually he's been the F2, F3 race director for a long time, so he should know situations like that and how to deal with them. I just think there's a bit of a arcanity, let's say, in the decision-making process, in that they're too afraid to kind of make a decision that strays outside of what the rules say. I think ultimately you should look at a situation, judge that situation on its merits, and then make the call. But they were sort of going, what do we do in this situation? Okay, well, in event of mirror on track, then we should not do this, X, blah, 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 X, Y, Z. And it's like, well, no, you just throw it out, get rid of it, and move on. That should be the call. So I think, yes, the race director does deserve a little bit of criticism for this, Rui Marquez. Yes, Formula One is a very different task to what he's dealt with before, but at the same time, the principles of race control should be the same everywhere.
Yeah, it's open wheel. It's an open wheel formula. He's come from an open wheel formula race director role. It's not like it's unusual for him. There's so many subtleties to it, but you just think, well, years ago we saw a part fly off the back of a car and hit Massa in the head, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a danger there too. Yes, somebody driving over this mirror, it just disintegrated and flew around the place. But it's sharp. It's carbon. It's sharp. You've got to be so careful. There are also marshals, on that pit wall. So it is a dangerous environment to be in. It's not just putting the drivers at risk. It's putting marshals at risk too.
Yeah, I think when it comes to a mirror, it just hasn't reflected well on the FIA at all.
Ba-da-bum. There you go. JBL coming to a comedy store near you. Nobody's going to attend that night, but never mind. Good. So bring your own tumbleweed. Right, next question. I think we covered that off, but you've got to learn from it. F1 has to learn from this.
100%.
How many times have we said that? Just learn from it, please. Right. Emmanuel, great name, on Instagram says, with Lawson set to be confirmed at Red Bull, is it the end of the line for Franco Colapinto? That seems quite dramatic. The end of the line for Franco Colapinto. And also, I'm going to throw it out there, Tsunoda. What about him? Because he seems to be the heir to the throne, really, when it comes to Red Bull. Start with you, JBL.
Oh, it should be Yuki in that seat. I think he's served his time. He's improved massively as a driver. There are moments where he's still slightly hot-headed on the radio. Mexico was a little bit of a moment of overdoing it, and I think he was trying to prove himself over Lawson in that Q2 session, and he put it in the wall. But I think ultimately, since he's sort of taken a step back, and I think you can probably say in Brazil, and you can probably say in the last couple of races, he's shown ahead of Lawson. He's shown to be, at this moment in time, the better driver. That's not to say that Lawson won't be a potential Red Bull driver in the future. But taking a snapshot of where we are now, it's clear that Lawson does have time to build and grow and needs probably a little bit of time at RB. So why would you not put Yuki in? I don't really understand that. And with regards to Franco, yes, the shine has come off in the last few races. Certainly came in, not much was known about him, I would say, in the mainstream sort of press, let's say. And then suddenly he puts in these fantastic results. Everybody wants a piece of Franco Colapinto. He's a bit of a phenomenon. And then he's had a few crashes and suddenly nobody wants to know who he is anymore. Again, just a driver that needs time, too much pressure too early. Now he needs to sort of take a step back, perhaps spend a year as a Williams reserve driver, and ply his trade and learn what it means to be a Formula One driver from the ground up, let's say.
We spoke about him last week, about how he finds the limit. I mean, the problem is he finds the limit too quickly. He's getting there. Maybe he's into finding the limit rather than finding the limit straight away. But Mark, what's your point on this, or your thoughts on this? Because Tsunoda is one big element to this. Colapinto, well, maybe it's slightly different because they're at different stages of their career.
Yeah, I think JBL's spot on. I think Yuki deserves that seat. I also think, though, it's worth noting that we know that Red Bull don't mind swapping their drivers around mid-season, so there's every chance by the time we get to this stage next year, Tsunoda's had a good run in a Red Bull. But on Colapinto, for me, I think we're basically seeing a rookie now, aren't we? We're seeing the rookie that he is, and that he was when he first replaced Logan Sargent, which, not many jobs in F1 are easy, but that's not too difficult, is it? But he came in with a burgeoning reputation as someone who was, ready to hit the ground running, and he did that whilst also building this huge fan base in Argentina, where there were comparisons to Messi, which is remarkable, really, isn't it? But the last few weeks we have basically seen a rookie Formula One driver, so you can't criticise him for that. The fact that these Williams keep crashing is not only his fault. We saw it with Sargent, we've seen it with Albon, who's much more experienced. But as JBL said perfectly, the shine has come off slightly, and that's why obviously this interest from Red Bull and RB has cooled somewhat.
Is there a Verstappen factor at play here in why maybe Tsunoda isn't in that seat next to him? Is it something to do with relationship, and maybe what Max needs is he needs somebody who's not going to cause anything to ruffle his feathers, or is it simple as they're giving it to Lawson? I think
it's ultimately, and I think it depends on who's making the decision, right? And I think if this decision was purely down to Helmut Marko, then you would probably have Yuki in the car. I think he's got a lot of time for Yuki. He's seen the growth. Even if Franz Tost was perhaps still involved at RB, he might be pushing for him a bit more. Although that's being said, on Friday last week, Laurent Mekies said Yuki's absolutely ready for the step up. But the issue here is Christian Horner doesn't seem to rate Tsunoda particularly highly. He's not ever spoken particularly glowingly of him. Not in a sort of, I don't want to overdo it kind of way, but in a he genuinely doesn't think he's up to much kind of way. And that's the disappointing factor, because I think Yuki's changed a lot of minds, but crucially, he's not changed the minds of the people that are making that decision, which is a shame, because again, when he came into Formula One, it was a little bit like Colapinto, actually. That first race, fantastic. Ross Brawn said, best rookie that's come into F1 for a while. And then he crashed a lot. That took the shine off. And since then, he's been rebuilding his reputation. And I think, ultimately, he's making the best of what he has, and he's earned this shot. And it's a shame that he's probably not going to get it.
So what does that mean for Tsunoda? Do you think that he needs to look elsewhere if he's not going to be able to climb the Red Bull family tree? Where's he go? Does he just stay there and just be an F1 driver until he's no longer an F1 driver, or does he look to other teams, to other engine manufacturers? What's the way for him?
I think he obviously will be RB for next season if as we understand, Lawson will get the drive with Red Bull. But you wonder if he'll have an eye on Aston Martin when they have their partnership with Honda. That might tie him into them for a while. Then you'd think might be looking for someone to finally replace Lando Stroll at some point. We don't know, but he's a talented driver who I think a lot of those midfield teams would like to have around for sure.
And there's an extra team in 2026, so 2 more drivers have a shot at a seat. So who knows what will happen just there. Next question then. Jamie on Instagram says, what do you make of the fallout? I love this question. What do you make of the fallout between Max Verstappen and George Russell? Max saying that he's lost all respect for George after his hysterics in the steward's office. Mark?
Yeah, I think Max just loves controversy, doesn't he? I think he thrives off controversy. He had everyone patting him on the back and telling him what a great driver he was after winning 4 world championships after Vegas. And that won't do for Max Verstappen, I don't think. I think he likes being told that he's doing things wrong, or that he's going to mix it with people. And I think it was a bit pot kettle black when you think back to some of the times this season when he's got on the radio and accused Lando Norris of driving the way he has. But yeah, I just think that's Max's MO. That's what he wants to set out to do. I think he likes being riled under the helmet.
Yeah, I think obviously when it comes to Max, I think there's a little bit of a difference with regards to Max on the radio and in the steward's room. On the radio, it does seem like it's fair game in that he could see Norris getting closer to him, and you have the situation there where he's clearly not slowed for the yellow flags. He asks that question, puts it to his pit wall, and they go and check, and obviously they go for it, and they find out that obviously he's not slowed. So then they go to the stewards. But I think that's it's in the heat of the moment, so it's fair game. What he took exception to was Russell's lobbying in the steward's room, and I don't think he liked the way that and as he put it, Russell was trying very, very hard to get him a penalty, and I think he found that a little bit shameless, a little bit telling the teacher on somebody after class. So it kind of depends where you stand on that, but I think he disliked that very much and used it as a way to get himself fired up behind the wheel.
Yeah, I mean, he's won the driver's title, though. It doesn't need to be firing anybody up, but he does seem to like this whole controversy thing going on. Does George have a point, though? Because it happened, it didn't even happen on a flying lap. It was, does he have a point that Max was too slow in that corner, or is it fair game?
Well, I think Max is only responding to the car that's ahead of him. I think that's, something that was ignored a little bit. There was a train of cars ahead, and so he's trying to build himself space, just as they're trying to do as well, because this is ahead of their final qualifying laps. And George does kind of come barreling in, and the delay between when he sees Verstappen and when he reacts to Verstappen is very, very different. And so you've got Russell trying to steam through these corners, finding Verstappen not dawdling on the racing line as such, but obviously he's driving quite slowly, and decides that he's going to try and go around him anyway, despite the fact that he's on he's on a slow lap as well. So I don't really understand how you can give a penalty for that when we know what the etiquette on a build lap is. It's not like Russell was on a flying lap, and if he was, penalty would have been justified, but it's sort of holding somebody up for something that isn't timed anyway. I don't really understand the penalty, to be honest with you.
Does it have any implications, knock-on effect to George Russell's position with the Grand Prix Drivers Association, because he's the spokesperson? He's got to listen to all of the drivers, have good-ish relationships with all the drivers as well, because he is their spokesperson.
Maybe it muddies the water ever so slightly, but George Russell's not the first active Formula 1 driver to hold that role, so you'd like to think it has absolutely no implication whatsoever. Maybe Max will think differently, but yeah, you'd like to think that absolutely no chance that his role with the GPDA would have resulted in that penalty, because then you're going down a wormhole that could you could have everyone will be wanting to be the spokesman of the F1 drivers and GPDA forever, wouldn't they? So,
it reminds me of, and I don't want anybody to take any offence to this, but it reminds me of Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer, shooting stars, when they used to get the handbags out and just like this towards each other. It just seems a bit petty, doesn't it, really? But petty, a calculated petty, because Max Verstappen knows exactly what he's doing. As we've discussed, he knows what he's doing out on track, he knows what he's doing off track as well. Is this the genius of Max Verstappen being a 4-time world champion, just turning the screw when he needs to?
I think it makes him a better driver. Maybe there are drivers that just need to be on the edge. You mentioned, they're not going to win the Constructors Championship. He's already won the Drivers' Championship. Obviously, race wins matter, but he didn't need to particularly be wound up on Sunday. He could have had that as a bit of a celebration party and just tooted around and been happy with it. But it felt like he needed to, maybe because he's won that World Championship, he needed that little bit of extra zing, if you like, to get in the car and have a reason to go out and put in a performance like he did.
So he's doing it to wind himself up as opposed to annoy the others.
A little bit, yeah. You sometimes need to, if you I'm not saying get in your own head as such, but sometimes you need to have a reason to, especially if you've just won a title, you kind of maybe need to have a reason to perform. And I think he knows that, and I think he knows what motivates him. That's why he's so good, ultimately.
What's going to happen this weekend? Final Grand Prix. He's got nothing to play for at all.
He's going to argue with someone, isn't he?
He's going to, isn't he?
We should have a sweepstake for who he's going to argue with this weekend.
I think we should. Right, thanks very much, gents. Next question then. Matt on Instagram says, what have you made of today's news? This is Wednesday today. News that the Dutch Grand Prix is being dropped from 2027.
Not massively surprised. I don't think anyone was by that. It's a Max Verstappen race, isn't it? We spoke about Max there. The whole reason F1 went back there was to Zandvoort was because of Max. The circuit itself, I don't think particularly lends itself to F1. The facilities certainly do not, media or otherwise. So it doesn't surprise me, especially with so many races elsewhere in the world queuing up to get on that calendar. They've got to get rid of some races to put others in there, regardless of what F1 actually wants. So that was one I think we always thought might fall off. I think the thing that surprised me when you see the reasons behind it is that Zandvoort and the race organisers themselves agreed to it. Like, this was part of the deal that they wanted and agreed with, obviously to boost ticket sales for those final 2 years, but they didn't seem to fight particularly hard to stay on it. So whether they thought the writing was already on the wall.
Yeah, you were saying before we recorded that you have a certain view on that circuit.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant event, and I covered that race last year, and it was really good fun. to be part of, but it's way too small for F1. If you look at how the facilities are, you've got sort of half the paddock in one place and the rest of it by the garages in a completely different place, and the media centre sort of between them, and you're kind of going backwards and forwards. It's not, I'm not going to say difficult to get to, because they're sort of like semi-regular trains from Amsterdam, especially over the Grand Prix weekend. They're a lot more regular. But it's essentially, it's a racetrack in a small beach town. It's like if you had a Formula One circuit at Weymouth, for example, that would probably be the equivalent for us. As I say, I really enjoyed that event, but again, the circuit's too small. Everything's just a little bit cramped. But it's cool to have such a sort of throwback circuit back on the calendar when, there's been the trend of having sort of relatively featureless races in the middle of nowhere. It is a real throwback, and if we have a situation where the cars get smaller in the future, then it'd be nice to see it back for a couple of races. But I think, ultimately as a full-time circuit, it was quite limited. But it's a little bit of a shame to see it go, but at the same time, not at all surprising.
Well, the cars are getting smaller, as we know, from 2026, but only just. Where's going to replace it then? I mean, I was at Istanbul Park just the other week for World Rallycross, and that place is derelict. You look at that place; it's still got the old boards over the garages with Lance Stroll and Gasly's name. They haven't even bothered taking those down. But where could replace the Dutch Grand Prix?
It's a good question, isn't it? Nothing jumps to mind straight off the bat, but we've got 2 more years of Zandvoort, so tracks, Paul Ricard, places like that will have their own, licking their lips potentially. Yeah, exactly. But I think it's important to Formula One, just going back to a little bit what JBL said there, to still have these races. You get off the train in Zandvoort and it's orange from the second you get off the train to the second you get into the track. It's just a sea of orange from the people that are getting off the trains, but also lining those streets with the kids selling stuff at the side of the road, and the fans having their boom boxes and things like that. It's an event, like you said, the F1's outgrown the circuit, but the event shows that having these almost fan-led races still really matter to the sport.
So it'll be an Amsterdam street race, will it? Because you love street races, don't you?
I'm open to street race. Who was it that didn't like street race?
More and more. Just replace all the circuits with street tracks.
And basically sort of have IndyCar but without ovals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but where could, in your mind, what about Qadir City Speed Park? Will that be open by 2027?
There's options. It basically is ultimately who has the money that they're going to stump up, and I don't necessarily know what the answer is there. Would the French Grand Prix come back? I'd be a bit surprised if Paul Ricard
that
came
just
back.
popped into my head. Yeah, I would be surprised.
There was always the discussion that it was going to be a rotation race with Spa. Maybe that sort of gives Spa a little bit of a reprieve. We've got Madrid coming in. Does Barcelona want to be on the calendar as well? Is there a couple more Middle Eastern nations that don't have a race yet? Kuwait, for example. I don't know. There's so many options out there. Ultimately, it'll just come down to money.
But in theory, not surprised. Well, basically, what you're saying in essence is not surprised it's gone, but it's a shame because it's clearly a fan-led Grand Prix and there's a lot of love for it internally in the Netherlands.
I think so. It's also worth noting that it's in the middle of that European season, and we're trying to get the calendar into a position now where we're not travelling as much and freight's not travelling as much. So whether it's replaced like for like, or whether it means that the calendar has to be shifted to add a race in the Middle East, another race in the Middle East, or whatever. So there is going to be logistical problems and logistical issues to what replace it on the calendar, I think, as well.
Great. That's a talking point for the future, isn't it? We shall investigate in 2026. We'll be discussing this one. Sophie on Autosport forums has asked, what do we make of the deteriorating relationship between the drivers and the FIA? I love this. Get your popcorn out. This is from MBS on Sunday saying, none of their business. Mohammed bin Salem obviously saying that. Thoughts, JBL?
It's sort of a bit funny. But at the same time, it's quite tragic as well, because you have a situation now where, of course, the drivers and the teams want to have a say because they sort of have equity in this championship. They don't always make the right points, I don't think. But and obviously because they have vested interests and that kind of thing, but ultimately they just want what's best for Formula One. They want what's best for the fans, what's best for, I think, the racing spectacle, ultimately a little bit their own interests, but at the same time I just don't think that's the only element of that. But for the FIA president to say that they are not interested in what effectively other stakeholders have to say, I think that's quite poor. It really is. What you have is, the drivers are there effectively representing the championship, and they're the focal point of people's fandom, and they do have opinions on it because they're the ones in the cars, and they're the only ones that know what it's like to race in Formula One, that kind of thing. And so for somebody to go, well, I'm a racing driver as well, and they should just race, when they don't, their experience for Formula One car is having binned it on the Dubai Autodrome or something like that. I think it's just a little bit poor. I think you make yourself weaker by not listening to people in life, and ultimately if he continues as FIA president, then Formula One's just going to get weaker because of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I completely agree, and JBL made the point there that the drivers and the teams are the focal points of Formula One, and I think that might be a sticking point for an FIA president who seemingly wants to be the focal point himself, and I don't know if that's part of the issue. It's a strange one that this whole, there's been an uneasy relationship for a while. Yeah, it seems to have reared its head again after the whole swearing issue that we saw earlier in the season in Singapore, and it seemed to have gone step by step and got worse and worse since then. But to come out and say that is such an odd statement to make, isn't it? We're heading into an election for the FIA presidency. It looks like it's going to be uncontested, but it's such a strange take on, you think he'd want all these teams on side. You think he almost needs them on side, but he clearly is saying, look, the FIA is bigger than you. I'm bigger than anyone in terms of my decision making. Ben Hunt, one of our colleagues, wrote a brilliant piece about this yesterday about voting rights within the FIA and things like that look set to change, and it's just setting a worrying trend for where we're going in the next couple of years, I think.
Yeah, I know I'm going to press you both on this a little bit more, because it's a bit like a football club manager who's lost the dressing room. They always say that. You just see that it seems to be falling away. But this manager, this president, the FIA president, doesn't seem to be aware, or if he is, doesn't care that he's losing the dressing room, right? And it's becoming a danger, maybe that it's a dictatorship when it doesn't need to be a dictatorship. That's from the outside looking in. How do you perceive it?
Yeah, carrying on the football equivalency, I suppose. It's a bit FIFA-y, isn't it? Like, it's just, you've got a guy, if you go back to maybe the Sepp Blatter times of FIFA, you've got a guy at the top who just wants to always be heard, wants it to be his way or the highway, says that he's not interested in what the stakeholders or the people that actually play the game or the people that watch the game care about. And it's turning more and more towards that now, which, once you go down that track, it's hard to come back from, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, it needs to be a kind of collaborative process, because a president doesn't have all of the answers. They're essentially the person that should be putting the right people in the right places within the FIA. They don't know everything. It's getting incredibly dictatorial, if I can say that, and it's a shame, because Formula One and motorsport as a it's not just Formula One that's affected, it's everybody in FIA championships. There's such a surplus of bright people that want the best for their respective championships and have worked in it for decades, and they know them inside out. And to be told by somebody who previously probably had very little regard for your championship telling you that you're wrong, that's not a great way to sort of build belief and confidence in a structure going forward. So that's the difficult bit here.
How does it resolve, or does it not resolve? Who just gets elected back in, re-elected, which it looks like, uncontested is going to be the one-horse race, and it's very hard to lose a one-horse race. It's possible, but it's not very likely. How's it resolve? Is it just going to snowball and we're going to find in a year's time we're in a complete pit of despair?
Hopefully not. Merry Christmas. I do think it's from a media perspective, it's been a few years since we've had any threats of F1 breakaways and team breakaways. So it's quite, from that perspective, it's quite an interesting time. You'd imagine he's going to win uncontested, wouldn't you? Which is not a great sign for the sport moving forward, for the relationships with the teams and everything. But at some point does he realise that he's lost everyone, that he's lost the support of everyone? And if he does that even matter? It's an interesting one, because no one really knows him that well, or even really his goals that well, or his long-term ambitions that well. It is going to take a long time for this to unwind and see where we get to down the road. But I think for the time being, he's going to hang around, isn't he?
I'll run. I'll do it. I'll be president.
Okay, so
Job
if you,
done.
excellent, JBL's up for it.
I'll sort the badges.
Great, I'll go for
Nice
it as
one.
well. Will you go for it? It's really put pressure on him.
I'll be his PR man.
Oh, damn.
So you'll definitely win it.
Done.
I won't beat JBL, not with his following on Instagram and stuff like that.
All three of them.
All three of them. Trump's mine by 2. Right, let's go to the next question. This is Jack on autosport.com asks, was it justified for Esteban Ocon to be released early from Alpine? Apparently he was told that he was losing his position just a couple of hours before the Grand Prix itself. And does this put more pressure on Doohan coming in for the final Grand Prix?
I think we discussed this before we came on air. He knows more than he lets on. He's a shrewd operator, is Ollie Oakes. So basically the situation was thus that Esteban wanted to be released for the end of season test at Haas. Alpine said, presumably, okay, we'll do that, but we want to put Jack Doohan in the seat around early. And so basically the sense of give him a pretty low pressure weekend. I suppose they can rely on, as they have done in the past few weekends, it's worth the risk of Gasly heading up the challenge for P6 in the Teams Championship. And if Doohan is good enough, then he'll help with that. So it's the chance to give him a full race weekend ahead of next season. And it happened quite quickly, I think. There was the sort of... I wasn't privy to them, but I understand that were murmurings before the race that Ocon was out. And then it did happen very quickly afterwards. It was just a case of getting Briatore and Toto Wolff, who is Esteban Ocon's manager, as part of the Mercedes junior team, together in a room, work out a deal. And now we have the situation where, and it's weird because we'd had a very, very static driver market ahead of this season, and now we've got another substitute in Jack Doohan coming in. So I do like a driver change, and I'm interested to see how it will go. But I think it was right for both parties to split. It was clear that the relationship was long gone, and they're just sort of dragging out the inevitable. So you got an opportunity to make a change, do it.
It is a gamble, though. One Grand Prix to go. A lot of money up for grabs with the constructors. Is it a gamble worth taking? Clearly, they think it is, from Briatore's point of view.
I was going to just hold President-elect JBL to task a bit there when he said it's low pressure for Doohan, because if Gasly doesn't qualify well, or if Gasly has an off or anything like that, and suddenly you've got tens of millions of dollars in constructors' prize money sitting on the shoulders of someone who's in their first ever race of Formula One, does that make sense? Probably not, but I think they probably weighed that up with the fact that Ocon clearly wasn't happy. He's had a few race weekends where I know we saw what happened in Brazil, but that was clearly a one-off for both of them. He's not been happy. He's felt that Gasly's had the support of the team where he hasn't, which is fair enough. Gasly's hanging around and he isn't. So I just think point of the ways made sense, but it is, if they'd already sewn up 6th place, fair enough, but it is, there could be a lot of pressure if things go differently in Abu Dhabi for Doohan to have to deliver on his debut. But he might go out there and do it, and then we all say what a brilliant decision it was, and he goes into next year already had a race under his belt, already a favourite of the team. He's already earned the money that's got everyone in the factory a new car or whatever for this Christmas. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but we won't be able to really judge it, I don't think, until after the weekend. Didn't get to show off his new final helmet though, did he? Ocon, the Alpine final helmet, which is sad. Do you think that the team have handled things well since Briatore's come in? Because there's been a lot of changes. There's been a lot going on in that squad.
It's been an odd one over the last few years because clearly there was a lot of issue with boardroom meddling at a boardroom level. Let's take, for example, where we were with Otmar Safnauer. There was clearly a bit of ill will at the team. Laurent Rossi he'd already gone by that point, hadn't he? After accusing the team of being amateurish. Clearly, the results weren't coming. The Renault group had been, they'd had their 5-year plan, their 100 race plan. Nothing had ever sort of really come to fruition. And so it was just sort of like this weird long period of change. Bruno Famin came in for a bit, and he was sort of, I would say, kind of the hatchet man in many respects, in that, you know, he was very, very kind of much disposable as team principal. He came in, he made some changes, but ultimately it was never going to be a long-term deal. It was basically get him in, get him to wield the axe a little bit, and then get him out again. And that's eventually what happened. You know, he reshuffled the technical department, basically got rid of the engine project as well, under, you know, duress, but that was always going to happen. And then he went off, and basically now it's Briatore and Oaks leading the team. And I think it's a bit more of a different structure. I think it's a little bit like Red Bull in the sense that you've got someone that's sort of very kind of dynamic and not, you know, worried to make big changes. And then you've got somebody that knows what it's like to run a racing operation, having done so in junior categories for a while. So I think the full scope of it's not going to be really realised until maybe 2026, when they're a customer team and they've made their changes. But I think it seems to be heading in the right way. Obviously, in 6 months' time, if we have more changes and someone else comes in, then clearly it's not gone right. But I think this should be a settled lineup for a bit. I've sort of got that feeling.
Mm.
Yeah, and you mentioned there the Red Bull comparison. I think it can even go, you look at this season, Red Bull have delivered a Drivers' Championship against the background of off-track things, behind-the-scenes issues, performance issues. Alpine's very similar. If they go on to finish sixth and take that prize money for that, it's similar really. They had the engine issues. You know, they were the slowest car on the grid at the first weekend of the season. The drivers clashed in Monaco. They've had their own issues this year. And if they end up delivering sixth in the Constructors Championship, I think they'll all be patting themselves on the back for sure. I'm
sure they will, with some nice bonuses as well. Just quickly, very, very quickly on the Haas point. Joining Ocon for that test on Tuesday is going to be Ryo Hirakawa. Now, raced in Super Formula, so he's used to the sort of open wheel race formula, but he's also more predominantly known as a tin top kind of driver, on LM car driver, WEC champion, two-time WEC champion. So what can we expect from Ryo Hirakawa? How likely is he going to be seen as a potential?
I think it's more, not lip service, because I don't think that's fair on him, but it's more about the agreement that Haas now has with Toyota that we're seeing that happen. I don't think we're suddenly going to see him promoted into a race seat anytime soon, but I think it's a longer term thing that they now have with the Toyota deal that was struck earlier this year.
He's also part of the McLaren development thing, because McLaren sort of has that agreement with Toyota as well. And this is all part of what Haas is doing with Toyota, which is basically not quite joint running as such, but using their testing of previous cars program to run young Toyota drivers or blood in new staff or that kind of thing. So I think having Hirakawa as part of that, someone that is going to have had F1 experience and does have F1 experience because he's been running in old McLaren machinery for the last couple of years, having him part of that will, you know, bring some insight. So I think ultimately it's a good opportunity to see where he's at with regards, you know, versus Ocon. And he's obviously doing FP1 for McLaren as well. So, yeah, he'll have some experience there.
He's also a very talented driver as well. Bill, final question. Bill on Instagram asks, who wins the Constructors' Championship? Final question. Who wins the Constructors' Championship between McLaren and Ferrari? 21 points separate.
Red Bull.
McLaren.
No, I'm joking.
Good one.
I said before Vegas that I thought Ferrari might nick it. I just thought they were on a bit of a crest of a wave, but I don't think there's a chance now that McLaren let that slip. The 10-second stop-go penalty for Norris in Qatar is essentially the only thing really that's kept it going into this weekend. You know, bar Ferrari 1-2, I think McLaren will do enough to get over the line, and deservedly so when you look at it over the course of the season. Ferrari have come good right at the end, but I think McLaren would be deserving winners of that.
Just to be different to Mark, I'm going to say Ferrari.
I'm going to say it's going to be McLaren. McLaren are going to win it. There you go. I'm very much on the fence. It's got to be McLaren, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
it's
so.
Too much of a lead. Yeah. It'll be catastrophic if it just go the other way. I mean,
but look how I'll look so good if I say Ferrari and it happens.
It would be, yeah. It would
Can we
be,
all have a go at saying Ferrari, then we'll just clip it differently.
Yes.
yeah, exactly. It'd be a very Ferrari thing for McLaren to do, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory in such an amazing way. But there you go. You have to stay tuned over the next week or so to find out, the next few days, in fact, to find out whether or not it is Mark that's correct or JBL that's correct with their McLaren Ferrari predictions. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Do stay in touch with what's going on by liking and subscribing. Get your questions in as well. After the Abu Dhabi, the season finale coming this weekend. You can get in touch on Instagram, on YouTube as well in the comments, and keep your eyes open for our call out on autosport.com. As always, thank you very much for watching, and thank you too as well. It's been a real pleasure.
I bet.
See you next time.